Hello, and welcome to the Embedded Tech Podcast, the show that dives deep into the challenges and innovations shaping embedded systems design. I'm Nicola Cope from the editorial team at ByteSnap and your host for today. I'm delighted to be joined by our senior software engineer, Liam O'Donnell, as he speaks about SBOMs for embedded system security. Thanks for joining us today. Let's kick off with some questions. Okay, Liam, how would you define an SBOM in the context of embedded systems, and what unique challenges does it present compared to traditional software applications?
Okay, so an SBOM is a software bill of materials. So this is what's going to describe what's gone into the application that you developed. So any libraries that you may have used, and potentially what libraries that the libraries you're using have used. So it's something that can be used to give you full traceability and visibility of what's actually gone into the software that you're using. Um, it's an interesting thing because this is something that potentially people should be doing anyway. When we tend to import libraries as software developers, a lot of the open source libraries come with license restrictions, and we must follow those license restrictions as we go through that. And at ByteSnap, this is something that we do with customers anyway. We ask for their authorization for a particular library that we might want to use in their product. It's their product at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And this we list that as part of this is what's gone into the project.
Mhm.
So I think sort of from a technical point of view, this is something that we really should be doing as developers anyway. Compiling a list, we have traceability. We know exactly what's gone into it, and we could also possibly extend that to using the list of tools we've got. So one of the things that we need to do is when we're working with multiple people on a team, we both need to be able to, or each individual on that team needs to be able to build the same product at the end of the day. So we need the same tools,
Yeah.
and this sort of thing could go in as part of the SBOM as well, whilst not mandated by the new regulations that are coming through. It's something that a lot of people will be doing anyway. So
It's good practice.
yeah, yeah, I think it's just good practice, and it is probably what a lot of people are doing anyway. Um, from an embedded point of view, we tend not to use a lot of libraries that contain a lot of other libraries. Where you're developing things like websites and desktop applications, you use a
Mhm.
lot of packages that you might download, and these packages have dependencies on other packages and other libraries and other licenses as well. And a lot of these are open source, so people can go in and audit them and check the
Mhm.
source code. But and some of the package managers like npm is used for a lot of JavaScript packages
Oh,
for use with Node.js. And you can go through and audit these packages for security reasons, but something like that doesn't really exist in the embedded world per se. With things like Rust, it might be becoming more popular. They have modules called crates.
uh-huh.
And to a certain extent, with a lot of the Linux and embedded work we do on those, there's a lot of packages that get installed as well.
Mhm.
So it's something that we sort of need to trace with those systems as well. So that it could be quite challenging on the Linux side, but from a microcontroller point of view, I think it's probably less so because you tend to use less libraries and less open source software.
Okay, so what unique challenges does it present compared to traditional software applications?
So again, sort of from a small microcontroller based device, it's less. Like I said, because we tend to use less libraries overall. We might use maybe one or two per
Yeah.
project, depending on how complex it is. But for something that is a Linux platform, there's a lot of open source software going on there. And you can use tools to sort of audit what's gone in there. So with some of the package managers, you can list the packages that you've got, and that's
Okay.
that's great to fill out as part of your bill of materials. It might not provide all of the information that's suggested that you need in some of the specific SBOM formats like SPDX and Cyclone DX are suggesting.
Okay.
Um, and then, like I mentioned, with the desktop development and web development, you've got so many packages that have so many nested uh, other packages, that can be quite complex, and third-party tools will definitely be useful for helping with that.
Great. And what are the critical components that should be included in all SBOMs?
From a bare minimum perspective, you obviously need where you're getting the library from, a hash of that library as well. So if you go to download it again, you can make sure that it's not been tampered with. The name, the version number, the license of the library as well, so you know what your obligations are for importing that library and then reusing it. I think that would be the bare minimum.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other things that you could add on to that as well, if such as nested dependencies as well,
Mhm.
which might be a bit more critical for security libraries and things like that.
Okay, that makes sense. So, how does the implementation of an SBOM impact the developmental lifecycle of embedded systems?
So I sort of touched on this by saying it's essentially something that we should be doing anyway,
Yes.
as
Yeah.
as part of making sure that we're tracking the libraries, the licenses of the libraries that we're using. I think, for example, if you didn't do this as part of your workflow, it could become quite complex towards the end. Particularly, again, if you've used a lot of libraries or you're working on an open source platform like Linux, it's got a lot of dependencies going on there. Um, that could be very problematic.
So, best to do it as you go along and not trying to
Yes,
look back. Yeah.
yeah.
No,
You're
that
only
makes
going to set yourself up for problems if you wait till the end.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
But I mean, it's interesting to think about it as well. So if people have ever worked with mechanical teams, they're quite often used to generating a bill of materials as they're going along
Mhm.
with the products that they're developing, and they've got to keep track of all of like the individual subcomponents and any fasteners and things like that. So it's it is essentially extra work, I guess, but it's good practice.
Right, let's move on to the next section. And what specific security vulnerabilities can SBOMs help identify in embedded systems?
So I think when you tie that in with your PSIRT and your monitoring of vulnerabilities, because you've got that traceability in a list, you know you can then cross-reference any new vulnerabilities against the libraries that you're using. And if your SBOM is detailed enough to go through the nested dependencies of the libraries, then you are providing yourself with more um, you're giving yourself more information and more of a chance to catch up with any vulnerabilities as they're found and disclosed
Okay,
on CVE registers.
okay, great. So moving on, how does an SBOM contribute to the overall cybersecurity strategy for embedded systems?
It's only part of it, and it's helping you with your response to any vulnerabilities as they're described. If you don't have an SBOM, the people who are going to be managing the response to these vulnerabilities are not necessarily the people who develop the product. It
Mhm.
might be part of your IT team, for example, and they're not going to know what's gone into the software as it's been developed. Um, so you need that so the people who are managing the response to this can do their job. Otherwise, they're just going to be fumbling around in the dark. And an example of this is when the Log4j vulnerability was discovered. I was working at a place that was dealing with government. We made products for the government essentially,
Mhm.
and we were getting a lot of requests as to whether any of the products we were using were exploited to the Log4j vulnerability. And we didn't have an SBOM. A lot of the products were made by third parties as well that we were integrating into a bigger system. So we had to go through and email all of our suppliers, who then
Wow.
had to go and check with their developers as well whether the products contained Log4j and whether it was a vulnerable version.
I'll have to try and
Um,
remember, I guess, as well. As
yeah,
well.
yeah. So I mean, you can see that sort of having an SBOM in this would sort of help you trace that through.
And would you say in the future, perhaps not having an SBOM might put people off buying certain devices or products?
Um, It's difficult because I don't know whether you would be feeding that information back to the consumer.
Okay, yeah.
It's not something. Well, whilst it is part of some requirements, it's not something that you're explicitly going to market on. I don't think.
No. Can you expand on those real world examples?
There are a lot of vulnerabilities. So there's the CVE register, which is a continually updated list of vulnerabilities. And I had a look at that on Friday, and there's loads of new entries. But there's no, you're going to have to monitor these lists to see if they match up to your software. And again, if you haven't got the bill of materials,
Yeah.
how can you cross-reference whether that's happening? And Log4j was it was quite well spread,
Hmm.
and that's why it hit the news. But a lot of these other vulnerabilities that are constantly being posted day in, day out are not making the news, but equally, they do have a severity attached to them. Um, and I'm not sure whether there are particular regulations that state, okay, so if this is a lower vulnerability, you don't have to do anything about it right now, but it would be good for you to update it in the future, or whether you must do something about every single one.
Yeah.
That needs a bit more research to sort of understand what the implications of that are, because it's going to be a waste of time. There's vulnerabilities going up every day. It's going to be a waste of somebody's time if they're checking every single one against however many products they may have that might be using however many libraries that are in the software.
Okay, so moving on to operational impact. How might the adoption of SBOMs affect the day to day operations of embedded systems development teams?
There are tools that you can use to generate the software bill of materials. A lot of these are proprietary and quite expensive to use. There are open source tools as well, and there are open source tools that can be integrated into part of your workflow. So you can integrate them into your CI/CD. So when you commit and run your tests, it can you can also do things like static analysis as well, which is checking your code for bugs and code smells and things like that, just to make sure that you're not inadvertently made a mistake. And so you can have integrations
Mhm.
that will generate the software bill of materials for you. So it's not something that you would have to go and do manually, which
Are they quite effective or do they sort of room for error in those?
um it's an interesting question. So from what I've seen, there tend not to be many towards embedded systems.
Okay.
These are more designed for your websites, desktop development, cloud development, that sort of thing. Um, and as I'm sure you're aware, sort of CI/CD is becoming popular in embedded now. It's been around. The whole DevOps thing has been around for many years in traditional software development, but it's only sort of a more modern, recent thing that teams are starting to use for embedded systems. So I think initially we might find that they're not very good for embedded systems, and they will get better over time. But there are a lot of companies that are trying to lean into this, and there are a lot of companies that already do static analysis that are trying to add SBOM support to their software as well, so to tie everything into one piece of software, rather than you having to go and pay for one company to do static analysis, one company to do your SBOMs.
That leads to our next question. What are the potential challenges in maintaining an up to date SBOM throughout the lifecycle of an embedded product?
So I guess it depends on how your team is going to go ahead and do this. But if you're using tools, then it could be quite simple if you've got it integrated into your workflow. But if you're going to do it manually, then it could be quite painful depending on the complexity of your project.
Yeah. So, moving on to cost benefit analysis, what are the primary costs associated with implementing and maintaining SBOMs for embedded systems?
Essentially, it's time.
Yeah. Mhm.
But on top of that, it depends whether you're going to do it yourself as a company, or whether you're going to use third-party proprietary software to do it for you, which can be very, very expensive. Typically, if you go on websites to look and get a pricing for this, it's call us for a quotation rather than giving you an explicit price.
Yeah.
Um, But it depends on your use case. If you're a small company and you've only got a team of like 2 or 3 developers, then you may choose to just do this manually if you're only working on small projects. Um, but sort of, I guess this sort of leads into another question. But if the software costs £10,000, but you get fined 4% of your turnover because you're not compliant with these regulations,
Yeah.
£10,000 doesn't seem like a lot of money, does it?
Right, now let's talk about future trends. How do you see the role of SBOMs evolving in the embedded systems industry over the next 5 years?
I think it's around the CI/CD DevOps integration. So
Mhm.
having this just as part of your workflow, um, and not something that potentially you won't even need to have any input to. It will just be automatically built for you as you run as you commit your code and run your tests and do a build on whatever, whether it's cloud infrastructure or local infrastructure.
Okay, and would you say that AI at its current momentum might have play a role in that as well?
I worry that it might get it wrong.
Okay.
But it might be useful to help parse um your projects. So uh where you've got tools that are doing static analysis, I'm not aware of any of them using AI. They might be. Um but these sorts of same methodologies are what I would expect them to be using to try and figure out what libraries you're using. Um so maybe.
Who knows what 5 years will bring?
I mean, I think it would essentially depend on how good it is and how many false positives it throws. Because if you're not monitoring your SBOM that's generated using some AI tools, it might say that you've got a piece of software in there that may have a vulnerability 6 months down the road, and you've handed over this SBOM to your IT team. Your IT team come back to you 6 to 8 months later saying, "Oh, can you fix this? There's a vulnerability in this library. Can you update it and issue a security patch?" And you look at it as a developer and you go, "That's not even in there. Where did this come from?"
Yeah.
So
No,
perhaps if AI was involved in that, and even with the tools that integrate into CI/CD, somebody maybe does need to just check it over,
a
have an
sense
audit.
check afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, now let's talk about regulatory compliance. How do SBOMs help embedded systems manufacturers comply with current and upcoming security regulations?
So it forms part of the response mechanism, the PSIRT. So again, if you haven't got the SBOM, you don't know what software that's in your product, and then you don't know whether you're vulnerable to any of these new vulnerabilities that are coming up, and then you don't know how to respond to that. And it could be quite messy.
Yeah, and expensive.
Yes. Yeah. But particularly if you don't do
Yeah,
anything about it, but you could waste time.
yeah, yeah, fair enough. And can that be sort of days or weeks of work trawling through to try and figure out whether you have this vulnerability?
It depends. I think possibly not if you took an approach to just update the soft, just update it wholesale.
Okay.
Um, but then you've got to take into consideration there. Well, if I'm updating this library, are there any other knock-on effects of that? Are some of the functions that I previously used, are they deprecated? Are they no longer available for me to use? Are they no longer good practice? Are there new, better, faster ways of doing this? And this sort of ties on to a question in the other part where if you've got to manage security patches for 5 years after your product is last sold on the market, you don't really want to be wasting time on something that's not generating any revenue for you.
Hmm.
From a business perspective, I guess, unless you've already factored in costs for that. Um, but it's kind of concerning that, so from a business perspective, if it was my business, I wouldn't want to be spending time on this. and wasting time if I haven't got the SBOM to find out whether my product's got this vulnerability, when it's not making me any money.
Yeah. Yeah. And could potentially lead to you needing to do a redesign as well, I guess. Is that another possibility?
Potentially, if there are space requirements that if it needs more software space, flash space for a microcontroller that's already resource constrained, then potentially, yeah.
On to our final section on best practices. What advice would you give to organizations just starting to implement SBOMs in their embedded systems development process?
I think possibly don't be afraid of doing the work because it is beneficial. It's not something that you're doing it's not a box ticking exercise, because it's useful for you to keep track of what you've got in your system or in your software, and what licenses as well. If you ignore the security aspect and you're coming at it just from, well, am I compliant with the licenses of the libraries that I'm using? Because if somebody knows that you're using a particular license that you're in breach of, you could fall foul of that license and be open to legal action potentially. So I guess just do it.
The sooner the better, really.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Liam. That's it for this episode. We hope you, the listeners, have enjoyed hearing all about the need for an SBOM. Do like, share, and subscribe for more industry news. I'm Nicola Cope, and you've been tuned into the Embedded Tech Podcast.